Driving, 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 music's blaring in my ears. Engines roaring, 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 the horizon's drawing near. Pedal to the floor, no more feet in the door. Gonna drive right out of this bitter night. I'm a constant seeker in Converse sneakers.
Well, I don't even know where to begin today since we had our promo and it took my thunder away, but I'll go anyway. Welcome to Nonprofit Insider. My name is David Unger, and I'm pleased to be hosting a show with executive directors and key people of local nonprofits. I personally have worked in the nonprofit world for over 30 years, and in those years I've realized that the majority of the community does not know about the organizations that provide critical services and benefits to our community that we sometimes take for granted. Nonprofit Insider is a chance to hear about the organizations that touch so many in our community. The opinions expressed on Nonprofit Insider are not necessarily those of WMPG, its staff, and underwriters, or of USM. Joining us today is Paul Drinan. Paul is the Executive Director of Friends of Fort Gorges. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
Okay.
What is it?
Nicknames.
Fogo. Fogo.
Fogo?
Fort Gorges, Fogo. And if you want to add the Friends of, we'll call it Fogo.
All right. So you have probably one of the most unique positions that I've ever run across, because I had a similar gig to yours about 8 or 9 years ago with Fort Popham, where you have to raise money to renovate a fort that a shot wasn't fired from, became obsolete in the middle of the Civil War.
It's just sitting there being
with a huge flagpole.
Yeah.
So talk to us about the fort. Why is it so important?
The fort is just an amazing asset to our community, and it's an underutilized asset. If you've ever taken a ferry out to one of the islands in Casco Bay, or if you've been up on the Eastern Promenade and looked out onto the bay, then you've seen the fort. And I'm amazed when I come across people who've lived in Portland their entire lives and have never been to the fort. It's pretty accessible by private craft or sea kayak, which you can rent right down at East End Beach. I highly recommend taking a trip out there if you've never been. It's an amazing, if you love architecture or history or just cool spaces, it's one of the coolest spaces you'll ever visit, certainly in Portland area.
So you take a kayak out there. Most of us don't have private boats to go do this. We take a kayak out there, or we con somebody into taking us. When we get out there, is there like a little dock where you launch from?
You just pull the kayak right up onto the beach, and there's only one way in and out of the fort, where they used to have the big gate. It's called the Sally Port. And, it's pretty self-explanatory. You just walk in and look around.
Are there signs and, historical...
There are not, and that's one of the things that we'd like to put in place. I would love to develop a smartphone app so that people can just walk through and get sort of a text or audio historical reference as they walk through and experience some of the key elements of the fort. The officers' quarters, the powder magazine, which is an amazing room off in the interiors of the fort where they kept all the gunpowder, all of the gun casements, which if you go on the website, you'll be able to see great photos and video of where all the cannons were placed. And then if you go up to the top tier, you can get a wonderful view of the harbor and looking back at the city of Portland.
So the ownership of the fort, because you're a Friends group, the Friends group actually does not own the fort, correct?
That's correct. The city of Portland owns the property.
Okay. So they designated the Friends group, or a group of people designated a Friends group to represent and work on behalf of the fort.
Correct. Friends of Fort Gorges was founded in 2000 by some local businessmen who saw a need and the fact that the fort was maybe in need of some help. And they put the flagpole out there that you see today.
Wasn't there a lot of controversy about that?
There was a lot of controversy around the flagpole. And in fact, it may have been enough controversy for them to lose their, interest in continuing. So the organization was dormant for a number of years. And last year, we approached them, and 2 of their old board members have transferred over to our new board. And, everyone still has the same mission in mind, which is first and foremost to restore the fort.
So what are some of the pressing problems that the fort's facing right now?
Well, starting with the pier itself, where boats would tie up, theoretically, or where they used to tie up, is completely falling apart. And the degradation has really accelerated in the last 3 to 5 years. It's just been awful. And if you go to the north side of the pier, you can see where the weather and the waves would crash with this winter weather patterns. And you can just see where it's all just falling away into the ocean. That would be, I'm guessing, our first major element of restoration would be the pier. And then once the pier is restored, we could then bring in the equipment necessary to get inside and work on the walls and the brick archways and get those things repaired.
When was the last time there was any renovation or upkeep to the fort that you can remember?
I'm not aware of any renovation or upkeep. There have been a couple of railings put in place and some other attempts made by people along the way, and vandals have summarily removed or burned or stolen most of those things. So it's just a wide open space, and there are some inherent dangers, and you just need to be an intelligent, reasonably well-behaved person when you go out there. Unfortunately, vandals have really taken a lot of the old, beautiful metal fixtures, and there used to be a walkway on the interior of the fort for the soldiers to run back and forth on. That's all been cut away and hauled off. So it's kind of sad to see some of that stuff. But again, it is what it is, and we just need to look at it and figure out a way to move forward.
So when we were getting to know each other a little bit before the show, you had mentioned that this is your first executive director gig.
Mm-hmm.
What's been your biggest aha moment since you...
What hasn't? I mean, there's so much to learn. Just one of the biggest things that's can be a little overwhelming at times is the amount of information that needs to be accumulated and disseminated, and how to collate that information in an organized fashion so that it is accessible when it needs to be to the people who need it. That's a challenge that I'm slowly overcoming. And I used to take notes on a Word document and then Google Docs, and then I changed over to spreadsheets because it was an easier way to track the information. But we're getting there. I've got all of our critical documents online available to board members now, and so it's a process. But that's just the information portion. Then there's fundraising, and there's grant writing, and then there's outreach and support and marketing and all the various elements that go along with running a nonprofit. And it's sort of a one-man circus. What's the term? One dog pony. What's
you're hitting all kinds of great analogies.
It's just me. And so if anyone's out there and you care about historical renovation or you're familiar with Fort Gorges, we need your help.
So if you had to identify one area you need help in the most, what would that be?
Fundraising.
Okay.
Yeah. We need to raise a tremendous amount of funds.
Define tremendous.
Millions.
Okay.
It's going to be, eventually it's going to be in the millions. To start, it's in the tens of thousands. And that's just, even if my position is currently unpaid, it has been since last May, and it will continue to be so until we get the funding. What I would love to fund first is a feasibility study to put price tags on the various elements of the fort, which we're breaking down into separate projects: the pier, the masonry, the archways. Those are the big ticket items.
One of the questions that I received a lot of when I was working with Fort Popham was, why? Why should we care?
Because this is an asset that people have enjoyed for generations. And if we don't act soon, the place will have to be boarded up. It's getting to that point. It's almost there now, in my opinion, if you go into the archways with the bricks are starting to fall. But it's still accessible, and for the most part, it is still safe. But in another 5 years, that may very well change.
So how would you define the partnership with the city?
Well, it's
Because they technically own it, right?
the city owns the property, and therefore the people of Portland, I think, ultimately will have say on what happens out there, and that's fine. You know, as most people are aware, the whole Congress Square Park issue really brought parks and open spaces and how they're used to the forefront in people's minds here in Portland. And it's probably a good thing in the long run. So anything that happens out at the fort, I'm guessing will have to go through committee and process of public comment. And that's great, because then we'll figure out what the community wants.
Forgetting your board and everybody else involved with it, if you had to describe a picture of what you would like to see in 10 years, what would that be?
Oh, man. I think it would be great.
Told you we were going off script.
Yeah, no, this is fine. I love the dream. I think it would be great to be able to be a resident of Portland or even a visitor to the city and walk down to the waterfront and plunk down your money, get on a boat, get a ride out to the fort, disembark safely.
So part of a ferry service or
A ferry service or a different boat, yeah.
Okay.
Get out there safely, walk in, and just have a wonderful experience. Like I said, a smartphone app where you could walk around the fort and get a historical tour. I would love to see one of the officers' quarters renovated and have sort of a living history museum in there. We have a great historian on our board, Joel Eastman, who knows anything and everything there is to know about that fort. And so to outfit one of the old officers' quarters with that information and the photographs and the blueprints of the fort would just be fascinating. And then beyond that, the space itself is just begging for some performance. You know, Shakespeare, a summer Shakespeare
So
series.
now we're bringing in your other life.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, that's okay. Yeah, that's my personal vision, is to see a summer Shakespeare series out there, or the symphony. I think would be appropriate for that space. It would just be a magical experience.
Okay, we're about ready to go to our midpoint break, but I do want to follow up because there's so many forts in the area, and you're competing with so many different avenues and venues at that point. But it's time for our trivia question. And this is the time where I get to ask a question that usually falls into the useless information category.
Okay.
But I try and get it close to the topic that we're talking about. So I'll ask you the question, I'll go to my midpoint identifier, and then I'll get your answer.
Okay.
And Deb already told you it's B, but it's not multiple choice this time. So, what is the oldest Civil War fort in the United States? And I'll give you a little hint. It's still active, and you cannot go onto your computer and look it up.
Oldest Civil War fort that is still active in the United
States.
Okay.
Okay, so my name is David Unger, and we're on Nonprofit Insider on WMPG. This is listener-supported FM community radio of Southern Maine and Eastern New Hampshire. Joining us today is Paul Drynan. Paul is the Executive Director of Fort Gorges. And the trivia question that I asked him, what is the oldest Civil War fort in the U.S. that is still active?
Fort Sumter.
According to Wikipedia, Colonel Henry Leavenworth and the officers and men of the 3rd Infantry Regiment from Jefferson Barracks at St. Louis, Missouri, established Fort Leavenworth in 1827 to be a forward base protecting the Santa Fe Trail. So Leavenworth.
Never would have got that. Our historian would have, but not me.
Okay. Well, like I said, this goes into sometimes the useless information
A
category.
shot in the dark. Boom.
But a shot was never fired from the fort.
Correct.
Okay. So an almost shot in the dark.
Almost.
So let's talk about some of the competition that you're facing, because if you're going to be going into the community and raising money, I know Fort Williams is always looking to upgrade their forts and, you know, the Civil War history there. There's up and down the coast, and this is just Maine. So why would anybody think that Fort Gorges would rank over any of the other projects, or should there be a coalition of people working for all the forts?
I'm a fan of coalitions, and I haven't really considered the adversarial elements or the competitive elements.
Oh, you haven't been fundraising very long.
Yeah, right. Good point. No, I mean, I'm aware of Fort Popham and Fort Knox and Fort Williams, and, you know, there's forts all along the East Coast. I like the idea of a coalition. I think that what sets us apart is the fact that Fort Gorges is on an island, and it's not out in the middle of nowhere. It's a 10-minute boat ride or a 20-minute paddle from the mainland. And because it's an island, I think it becomes a unique experience.
But the island can go, the island can go opposite too.
Mm-hmm. Accessibility is an issue.
Right.
And it will remain an issue for years, you know, until we repair that pier and get the fort to a place where we can actually build a dock and welcome the public in you know, properly. Accessibility will remain an issue. But that's a good thing too, because we're just not ready to handle a crowd out there yet.
Right. So you talked about having theater or musical programs out there, you know, in 10 years when it's over and done with. And you said you needed to raise millions and get started with tens of thousands.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to the fort if you don't raise this money?
In my opinion, what I'm seeing and what I've seen, so I visit the fort frequently, and I have for years, the state of degradation today, not just the pier, but the fort itself, is such that I think if we don't start acting soon, and I mean in the next couple of years, the place will be boarded up.
That'd be a shame.
It would be a shame.
What has been, I mean, you're coming into this as a lot of nonprofit execs do, new nonprofit execs. It's a startup organization. You have no real core. You have a very specific mission. Your program growth really isn't there until you fix the physical property.
Correct.
What's been your biggest frustration, or what do you see the biggest roadblock being as a new nonprofit exec?
I think probably the fact that we don't have control over the property. So we really are going to have to, work with the city and go through whatever sort of process needs to occur to get things done out there. And like I said, I'm guessing that will involve meetings and periods of public comment and committees, and it could really slow things down. But it is what it is. The city owns it. That's not changing, and so we need to. We're just going to have to go through whatever process they think is necessary.
So your board really doesn't have the final say and control over this.
Absolutely not. No, I think that we could, suggest ideas, and we could oversee the restoration. But as far as changing things out there or implementing programs, I don't see any of that happening without community support.
Community support meaning rallying through the city itself to get...
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to make sure we're clear, you're basically operating as a fundraising arm then for the city.
Well...
It's okay.
Sure. I guess at the end of the day, if we're raising funds and making improvements out there and the city owns the property, you could look at it that way. If we ever generate revenue, then we'd have to have a conversation about where that revenue goes. Does it go to Friends of, or does it go to the city? Does it get split?
But you're working, and a lot of Friends groups are like this. So, it's a common theme where the city can't raise money specifically to take care of the fort because it's the city.
Mm-hmm. It is so far off their radar.
But even if it wasn't, in terms of monies available, because they're a city, a lot of foundations won't give to municipalities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Friends groups and a lot of Friends groups that are out there, even booster clubs in high schools, okay, the concept of having this type of organization evolve and develop as a fundraising arm, so so it supports the programs that the city or the schools put into play, because they can't do that. Does your board work in that direction, or?
Well, we're a very, very new organization. We just had our first official board meeting in January.
Okay.
And our second one will be quarterly meetings. So our second one is slated for April. And these are all things we're going to have to work out as we go. And I know that there will be growing pains, and everyone on the board's aware of that as well.
All right. I'm going to ask you a question now that probably isn't fair, but it's live radio and WMPG, so let's go for it.
Okay, Dave.
What keeps you up at night when you think about this stuff?
Oh, just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, you know, just making sure things get done right.
Okay. Why should anybody contribute to the fort?
Well,
and you can't read off your computer.
Okay, I don't need to. This is part of my elevator pitch. If you've been in Portland long enough to remember Union Station, the grand old train station down St. John Street.
I've heard of it, yes.
Okay. Google it. Google, if you don't know what Union Station is, Google it. Union Station, Portland, Maine. You will see a magnificent old granite building with a beautiful clock tower. The clock was built by the same guy that built the clock at Big Ben in London.
Okay.
And it is sort of reminiscent of Big Ben. They smashed that building down in 1961 to build that sad little strip mall that sits there today. And don't get me wrong, I love Maine hardware and I support local businesses, but man, what an architectural and historical travesty. In fact, it was the tearing down of that building that prompted the beginning of the preservation committee and people paying attention to historical structures in Portland. But, you know, if you're familiar with that story, then you get it. You know that, you know, I don't want, and a lot of people don't want Fort Gorges to become Portland's next Union Station. And not that anyone's going to tear the fort down, but nature is tearing it down as we speak.
Right.
So if we don't get on the ball and make some stuff happen, and soon, I really do believe the place is going to be boarded up.
And if they go to your Facebook page or your website, you can actually see some of the photos that the ice has created damage on, correct?
You can. Yeah.
And what are the...
The Facebook page is Friends of Fort Gorges.
Okay.
And the website is www.friendsoffortgorges.org.
Okay. Do you have any questions for me?
I do. I know that you've been doing nonprofit consulting work for years, and so I'd love to sit down with you sometime and pick your brain.
I mean, right now.
Right now?
Right now.
Oh. Yeah, why? You said earlier that we are unique as opposed to most of the nonprofits out there. And what did you mean by that?
Well, because you are a friends group, okay, your mission is very focused. You're there to raise money to protect a valuable asset of the city, the state, and the country. Just so happens that the city owns it. And because it's a friends group, you really don't have the total control over it. So, you know, that presents a whole different set of problems. So if you have a donor that wants to give you $25,000, I'm just making this up, and the city doesn't want to go in that direction, you have to then turn down that gift because the donor's intent is to do it under one direction and the city doesn't want to do that. So you have to be very, very in sync with the direction that the city goes. And I ran into some of this when I was working with the state in Fort Popham, that the Friends group wanted to go one direction. The state said, whoa, we wanted to go in this direction. And the Friends group said, well, we're just not going to do it if you want to go in that direction. You know, so we finally got into the compromise on how to make it work. But, you know, it's that balancing act. And because you're raising money for just such a very specific piece, your board has to be attuned to that and stay very focused on the mission of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, we're all aware of the challenges of dealing with a property that's owned by the city.
Right. And the fundraising itself is very difficult. I mean, because, you have a very specific niche. And when I talk to groups about, what are your moving parts for fundraising, you have one moving part right now.
Right.
Construction, renovation, and preservation.
Even before that, feasibility.
I put that as part of that.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so.
Yeah, most nonprofits, when I look into the fundraising world, it seems to be the one word that keeps coming up is programs. And we just don't have any yet, and we won't until we get the restoration in order.
But you do have a program, because I consider restoration a program of what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, your moving parts are a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, great. I like it. Anything positive, keep it coming.
So your story, we had a trio of consultants on the show a couple weeks ago. We talked a lot about how you need to create that story that will really appeal to not just your major donors, but, as you said earlier, getting the community support behind you. And making that happen is going to be absolutely critical in moving forward with this. So, if someone wanted to make a donation,
Mm-hmm.
and we're hoping they would,
Yes.
how would they do that?
The best way to make a donation today is to mail a check to our address, which is on the website, friendsoffortgorges.org, or P.O. Box 511, Portland, Maine,
Okay.
04112. Soon, I'm in the process of redoing the website. We will have a donate button on the website that will link to our bank account. Or if you run into me in person, I could take your credit card and run to the bank. No, I have a swiper that I use for the organization.
Okay. Do you have T-shirts yet?
No merch.
No merch?
No goodies yet.
Oh, what's taking
We don't-
you so long?
We don't have a brand yet. So if there's any graphic designers or, branding gurus out there, I've done a bunch of that
You
myself.
have a fort. What more do you need?
I know. Big granite block lettering. I'd really love to see a cool logo and a slogan, and I'm not married to the whole Fofogo thing. That's just something that popped up.
It's a lot of fun, and it looks great. And if you haven't been to their website, I encourage everybody to go, because it's bright, it's cheery, and some great pictures on it.
Yeah, check out the video and give us a Facebook like, and
Good.
follow us on Twitter at Fofogo, Fofogo.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, Dave.
David.
David, sorry.
That's okay. Some nicknames are like chalk on that. So, the music appears courtesy of Mike Hubbard. You can find Mike's music on www.michaelhubbardmusic.com. Check out Mike's website to see where he's playing this weekend. Thanks to Deb Danger, MPI's executive engineer. You can catch Deb on Morning Street Friday.